You're listening to Ecto Portal, a journey into the unknown with Anthony Anderson and Verna Wilson.
I hope that you are seated comfortably, with the light turned down and the curtains drawn.
Hello, once again, to another journey into the unexplored, the unexplained, the unknown. Ecto Portal. I'm Anthony Anderson, your host, and I'm here with my co-host,
Verna Wilson. Hi, everybody.
And today's show is about...
Half-Hanged Mary.
Yes, Half-Hanged Mary.
Which I think in popular culture, most people have heard of her.
Really?
Yeah, Margaret Atwood actually did a ballad about her, and I think there's been a movie done about Half-Hanged Mary.
Did she write a book about her?
I think it was actually a book and a ballad. There was a ballad, like a poem.
Because I think Margaret Atwood is the same Margaret Atwood that wrote The Handmaid's Tale, if I'm
right.
Okay, I didn't know.
And she wrote something about Half-Hanged Mary as well.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I think it's also been made into a popular movie as well, although I have not seen the movie, but it was actually captured on film.
Do you know how old the movie is?
I don't know how old the movie is.
Interesting.
Yeah, I don't know how old the movie is. I think there's been movies and TVs and films and ballads and things like that have caught on with the story, and it's been actually very well known in popular culture.
And this is yet another witch trial. Puritan witch trial on the East Coast of America. Well,
the difference between this witch trial, and the popular witch and the witch trials that we hear of, was that this was 10 years before the actual witch trials started.
So it was almost like the germination of what was to come.
Yes, what was to come. That's correct.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and the difference also between this case and the regular witch trials is that this woman managed to survive, and. Anyway, we're going to get into it. We're going to find out what happened with her, why she survived the hanging, and what was going on in the community at the time. Right. This happened in 1683. There was it happened in Massachusetts, New England, and a jury acquitted her of witchcraft. And her neighbors still thought of her as a witch, especially she survived after they left her hanging from a tree, which I think is extremely cruel to leave a woman hanging from a tree. It was 9 years before the witch trials would begin. It was a time when people used to accuse witchcraft. They believed in the supernatural quite commonly, and they would accuse people. And in nearby Northampton, Massachusetts, Mary Bliss Parsons was accused of witchcraft in 1675, but she was exonerated. That was another person nearby in the same area, and the accusations were common, but the convictions were rare until about 1692 to 1693, when 20 people were executed during the Salem witch trials. So a lot of people probably believed in it, and they probably used to accuse, but I think they rarely came to anything at the time. Yeah. So anyway, the exoneration, of course, didn't lift any suspicion from who they thought it was a witch. The Puritans, they believed that they believe in bothering the witches or beating or restraining them to prevent them from casting spells. So they used to harass them all the time, long after they were exonerated. So someone could be suspected of witchcraft, and they could expect to be harassed by the community. And this especially happened with Mary Webster, and that's why her bizarre death became a well-known legend, and it nearly got her killed.
Almost like the beginning focal point for that whole movement, I think.
It was the beginning focal point, yeah. You know how something could just build up and and raise fear in the community. And, yeah. Well, her name was Mary Webster. She was born Mary Reeve, daughter of Thomas Reeve and Hannah Rowe in England around 1624. And the family migrated to Springfield in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. And she married William Webster in 1670, and he was 53 years old, and she was about 49. So it's kind of rare that they got married at such a later age, isn't it?
That is odd.
Especially around that time. You know how people got married really young.
Exactly.
They lived in the town of Hadley, Massachusetts, 20 miles north of Springfield along the Connecticut River. And William and Mary had a little bit of money. They were well off. They lived in a small house, and sometimes they needed help from the town to survive. So sometimes they needed a little help from the community. So anyway, Mary had a bad temper, and she spoke harshly when offended. And Sylvester Judd wrote about this in his 1905 history of Mary Hadley. So she was despised, she sometimes ill-treated, and she was sour, and she was rendered spiteful towards some of the neighbors. And of course, you know, when somebody's older and they're sour-tempered and they're considered a little odd, that's kind of a ripe...
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
Target coming.
Yeah. So they began to call her a witch and abuse her. Yeah.
You're a witch.
Mm-hmm. And Mary Webster supposedly put a spell on cattle and horses so that they couldn't go past her house. The drivers found her and beat her so that the animals could pass.
Okay, that sounds like complete ignorance, but that's all right.
That sounds like abuse to me. I mean... if people were abusing you and treating you like that, I would be sour-tempered too.
Well, isn't it the mob mentality at that point? When someone claims she's a witch, she's cursing all of us.
Absolutely, it's mob mentality.
Everything that goes wrong suddenly is that person's fault, and everybody chimes in, it's her fault, let's beat her.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And she once walked into a house, and a hen fell down a chimney into a pot of boiling water. And she had a scald mark on her body, probably from the hot water, but her neighbors called it the witch's mark. Ugh. Anything to make her look bad. Yeah. So on March 27th, 1683, the Northampton County Court magistrates examined Mary's on suspicion of witchcraft. The Northampton magistrates decided they couldn't handle the matter, so they sent Mary to Boston in April. Now, she waited in jail until her court date had arrived on May 22nd, 1683, when the evidence against her was heard by Governor Simon Bradstreet, Deputy Governor Thomas Danforth, and 9 assistants. Now, they decided to indict her for that she, not having the fear of God before her eyes, and being instigated by the devil, hath entered into convent and had familiarity with him in the shape of warinage, Fisher, or wild black cat of the woods, and had imps sucking her and teats, or marks found on her. Right.
Witches supposedly suckled their imps or familiars, maybe even the devil in exchange for help with their magic. Anybody who's watched the recent TV series on Netflix, Sabrina, there's a point where Sabrina at the witches' school, everybody has to pick their familiar, who knows everything about them, assists them, is basically their closest living thing to them.
Well, and actually modern witchcraft and Wicca, a lot of witches have familiars, and that includes myself. And it's a way of getting close to nature and having the animal kingdom and the nature kingdom help you.
Exactly, it's assistance.
It's assistance, right? And the Indians have it with power animals, and it's kind of the same. It's actually the same as Native American shamanism. It's just more the the European Celtic. I'm explaining this so people will understand why some of these customs have remained in that community and in that and why some of anyway. That's
at her trial on June 1st, 1683, the court found Mary Webster not guilty, and she returned to Hadley. Now, Cotton Mather weighed in. Mary Webster still faced persecution back home, and a year and a half after she returned, a very prominent citizen in Hadley named Phillip Smith, he died a painful death. Cotton Mather, notorious for supporting the Salem witch trials, devoted a chapter of his 1702 book, Magnalia Christi Americana, to Smith's last days and the mysterious circumstances that surrounded them. Mayer, along with the people of Hadley, had no doubt that Mary Webster murdered Phillip Smith with a hideous witchcraft, and all because he tried to help her. At the beginning of January 1684, Smith suffered fits and delirium. He was in great pain, crying out, "Lord, stay thy hand, it is enough, it is more than thy frail servant can bear."
Of course, that's what you do when you have a fever.
Yes, it is. Mm-hmm. Smith also managed to blame Mary Webster for his dire condition. How convenient that is. Strange things happened at his sickbed. Ports of medicine mysteriously emptied. When others held him down during his fits, they heard scratchings around the bed and saw fire on top of it. They also felt something in the bed as large as a cat.
You know, if you believe in this, in the spirit world, and actually, if this were happening now, I believe that you're so fragile that you attract lower end spirits when you're that fragile, and
nasty.
Or that nasty. I agree, and and who knows? I mean, there could have been paranormal activity going on in that place, and they didn't.
Yep, it sounds to me like he was haunted more than he was being bewitched.
And also, he was very sick at the same time. Those things don't mix very well.
So he's fever, he's delirious, he has no medicine.
Right.
He's blaming the local fad, which is to blame Mary for all his shortcomings and illness.
Right.
And his oncoming death because of the illness.
Yes.
And he hears scratch sounds, and they said they saw fire on his bed.
Right.
It could have been something clinging to him because of all this.
I agree
with
that.
I don't think it was Mary.
Yeah, and it's interesting that we understand these things now, but back then it freaked people out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
After Phillip Smith died, his corpse had a swelling in one breast, and there were bruises on the back and holes that seemed made with awls. And though he died on Saturday morning, his body was still warm on Sunday afternoon, though it was cold outside. On Monday, his face was discolored and blood running down his cheek. Finally, people heard strange noises in the room where his corpse lay. The death of Phillip Smith filled all those parts of New England with astonishment, wrote Mayer.
And illustration of witches perhaps being tortured before James IV from his James VI, from his Daemonology, which was in 1597. He mentioned that the young men of Hadley believed that disturbing Mary Webster would ease Smith's pain, so they went after her.
So blame her.
So go ahead and blame her, yeah. Those young men needed a kick in the butt. They sure did. So Thomas Hutchinson, in his History of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, described what they did to her. While Phillip Smith lay ill, a number of brisk lads tried to experiment upon the old woman. Having dragged her out of the house, they hung her up until she was near dead, let her down, rolled her sometime in the snow, and at last buried her in it, and there left her. But it happened that she survived, and the melancholy man died. So she earned the nickname Half-Hang Mary, and she lived another 11 years. And the townspeople, no doubt, continued to persecute her. The Canadian novelist and poet Margaret Atwood believed that she's descended from Mary Webster. In 1995, she wrote a poem called Half-Hang Mary about her ancestor. Her novel, The Handmaid's Tale, is dedicated to Mary Webster. So with thanks, that is interesting.
There you go.
And with thanks to Mary Webster, the Witch of Hadley, from a talk by Bridget M. Marshall in May 2003. Excuse me. The story was updated in 2018. She was born in England. Exact birth year is unknown, but it's believed to be around 1624. Accounts of her birth date range from 1617 to 1624. Both her father and brother were named Thomas Reed. We already went over all of this, but we're going to kind of go through it again really quickly. Her father lived in Springfield, Massachusetts, according to the New England Historical Society. Her mother's name was Hannah Rowe Reeve. And in 1670, she married William Webster. They settled in the small Puritan town of Hadley, Massachusetts. No records exist of Webster having any children. And of course, she was accused by Phillip Smith in 1684. He was a judge and a representative of the town of Hadley. He also had been described as a hypochondriac.
Interesting.
Yeah. He seems to have believed in the real power of witchcraft and that his afflictions were being magically caused by Mary Webster in collaboration with the devil. And of course, while he lay ill, a number of brisk lads tried to experiment upon the poor old woman. Having dragged her out of her house, they hung her up until she was near dead. Let her down. They rolled her in the snow and then buried her and then left her, but she survived. And the poor man the poor man died. Yep. Poor man. The melancholy hypochondriac man died. According to one of several accounts, she was actually left hanging all night, which wouldn't surprise me, considering she probably didn't know how to get herself down without falling.
Well, that doesn't make any sense, because if they half hung her, let her down, rubbed her in the snow, and buried her, that isn't leaving her hanging all night.
No, that isn't leaving her hanging all night.
So it makes more sense to me that she survived by being buried, and they took off.
And they took off, and she pretended like she was dead, and then when they were gone,
she probably was half dead, and she probably woke up and they were already gone.
Yeah. But, those guys who did that, they needed an ass whooping.
Lynching is what it is. It's lynching.
Yeah, they needed an ass whooping. Those young guys treating an elderly person like that. And where were the town people to protect her? If this was a town of law and justice, why didn't they protect that poor woman?
It didn't sound like it was a town of law and justice if they were all abusing her.
No, I said if they were.
Oh yeah,
like they claim to be.
Well, it's funny because I would hate to have been alive during this period living in these communities, because one little thing differently you do than from everybody else,
and all of a sudden
you're a heathen, you're a witch, a warlock.
They were very
servant
clannish.
of the devil.
Very clannish back then.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But Puritan is sure the case, because obviously the Europeans couldn't stand them, and I know they went, we need to go find our own new way. Let's go to America and start our own colony. Mm-hmm. But they took all the persecution from England and parts of Europe with them. Mm-hmm. And then they almost magnified it once they got there. Like, okay, we're going to have a Puritan, God-fearing community, mm-hmm. so that anybody who does anything inappropriate, not in line with God and with the scriptures, is going to be seen as a heathen and a devil, or a devil worshiper, or a witch, mm-hmm. or a warlock, or whatever, and must be destroyed.
And the interesting part that I believe that I heard about this. Now, there's some other things about this tale that was not relayed in parts of the story that I read.
Right.
Well, one was that she had a farm of her own. I don't know what happened to her husband. They never said what happened, why she was alone after a while. But I bet you anything, if he'd have been there to protect her, half that abuse wouldn't have happened. But apparently she lived in a farm, and she experimented with herbs, and she had a cure for warts. And she was good. Yeah, and she was good at it. Apparently, she was very good at it. So
they say she had blue eyes. She had sunburned skin
and very blue eyes.
Yeah.
So of course, she probably looked to them. She probably had very striking looks that looked a little off to them.
Well, the blue eyes probably threw most of them off, because a lot of them coming from Europe and England, they may not have had a bunch of blue-eyed people.
Well, I think they might have, because most of the settlers in that town all came from, they were settlers from England at the time.
Doesn't mean they're all blue-eyed.
Oh, no, not all blue-eyed, but you know how it is with the British. They either have the Saxon background, which gives them the fair hair and blue eyes, or they have the Celtic, which gives them the dark hair and the olive skin.
But I imagine there wasn't nearly as many people as we have now. So your communities are going to be small.
They're going to be very small. I agree with you. Yeah.
Obviously, mob mentality with a community that's smaller is going to kick in a lot faster and a lot harder.
And the fact that she was an herb woman, and she ran a farm, which I think was remarkable that she was able to run a farm on her own, even though she was probably poor at the time.
Yeah.
And of course, a woman on her own, running things on her own, you're already a weirdo.
I wonder when her husband died, because if they married when she was 46 and he was 53 or 59.
Who knows how long they were together?
I don't know. It just makes you wonder, like, was it not for very long? And then once he died, she was left running the farm.
Probably.
So then they probably thought, oh God, she killed her husband. She must have killed her husband. I'm sure the rumors that would go around would start.
I'm sure there were a lot of rumors that haven't been recorded that they thought about her. And the fact that she was able to cure warts, which, back then, a lot of cures were considered, unless you were an established doctor, and not a woman practicing herbal medicine. Mm-hmm. But then a lot of the medicine back then was herbal.
What I find interesting about this particular case is the group of young lads that dragged her from her house into the forest, hung her from a tree, and then let her down. Why didn't you just leave her hanging in the tree if you wanted her dead?
If you wanted her dead, it
doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't make any sense. I see it as the same thing that you see now with a bunch of hoodlum gangs. Mm-hmm. They just want to harass, and then they think it's funny, and then they just do something stupid and they go.
I mean, was it to scare her? Was it to?
Yeah.
Maybe they thought she was dead when they pulled her down and they buried her.
Can you imagine their parents didn't teach them any better, didn't they? If it were my son doing something like that.
Well, it sounds like it's the parents that were encouraging them to do it.
Encouraging, I know. They would have gotten an ass whooping they needed.
This reminds me, you hear a lot about tales in the South.
Yeah.
In the 1800s and stuff,
right.
Of what they would do with runaway slaves.
Oh, yeah, it's terrible. Yeah.
All this kind of stuff. Same idea. Lynch them. Everyone in town is like, lynch them, string them up.
Have you ever read the book 12 Years a Slave?
I just saw the movie. I didn't read the book.
Okay, I have the movie and the book. And in the book, which they didn't talk about in the movie, Master Epps, the last master that he was with.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. He had an 11-year-old son, and he would encourage the 11-year-old son to ride with him and hit and whip the slaves. And he recalls an account where the 11-year-old is whipping an elderly slave, a man like almost late 60s, early 70s, which back then, you were probably very frail at that time.
Exactly.
Yeah, and he mentioned how horrible it was to watch an 11-year-old kid whipping and hitting an elderly man. So it's the same idea. It's like if you consider somebody inferior and awful, you encourage them.
Sad part is ignorance breeds.
Exactly.
It still breeds today. In fact, we see a lot of it today.
Oh, we do. We do see a lot of it.
That's why we have mass shootings, because ignorance still breeds and still reacts and thinks they're doing their, the God's work and the people's work.
Yeah, today for the elderly we have adult protective services, but we still see a lot of elder abuse going on.
Absolutely, caregivers.
Yeah, and people still point. I don't care what anybody says. People still point and ostracize people who are different. They still do.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Is it's never gone away.
No,
it just changes hands, sort of, in different ways. But it's the hatred's there, the resentment's there, the mob mentality is still alive and well.
It's still alive, especially in smaller communities where people are act very clannish. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I haven't.
We have our ways. We're set in our ways.
We're set in our ways.
You're different than us, so therefore we have to abolish you,
or we have to treat you badly, and yeah.
It's interesting how some of those instincts still survive and are still alive and rampant even today.
Yeah.
And this was in the 1600s.
This was in the 1600s, but I had a friend tell me, maybe it was, it was quite a while ago, but he comes from a small town, and he told me, and I told him, well, it sounds really, we were talking about the culture and how old it is and how neat it is, and he goes, well, if you go there, I can guarantee you're going to stick out like a sore thumb. Everybody's going to know you're not from there. And it doesn't mean that anything bad will happen to me, but I can imagine how people can perceive somebody acting and being different.
But I'm thinking back to this case, which I still find interesting, is the town called her a witch.
Yes.
labeled her a witch.
Right.
Everybody was abusing her. She was indicted, and they decided they couldn't even decide if she was truly a witch to kill. So they shipped her to Boston. Boston decided, well, this and this. Boston was grasping at straws by the description that they gave. And they're like, you know what? We really don't have enough here.
They acquitted her.
We're going to acquit her. So isn't it odd that the town that accused her and shipped her off to be tried as a witch couldn't even do it themselves because they couldn't prove that she was a witch? So they thought, let's ship her to Boston. Boston will find out she's a witch.
What gets to me is, what right do they have to ship her to Boston anyway?
Well, it's the law.
It's
the law of the land. If the magistrate and the town magistrate decide
all right.
you
If it
are
was
a
the
witch,
law, yeah. Okay.
You're going to get shipped off because you're indicted to be a witch. But I find it very ironic that they couldn't themselves determine she was a witch.
Yeah.
But yet they were convinced.
Right.
And they shipped her to Boston. Of course, just the mere thought of shipping a woman who's accused of a witch from Connecticut to Boston.
Yes.
Meaning you went to that much trouble to ship someone to Boston because they might be a witch and they're going to go on trial. You would have thought Boston would have went, well, they shipped her here. She must be a witch. Mm-hmm. They went to that much trouble for this person. But then they acquitted her because they couldn't find anything, because there was nothing to find.
And also it made the townspeople even angrier because she came back and they were wrong. So I think they were angry. I think that's exactly what you said is exactly. Yeah,
it's a retaliation.
They retaliation
revenge.
for being wrong. Yeah.
So then instead of dealing with it, and they said she was picked on and called a witch even up until she died, 11 years later?
Yeah, well, those people in Boston who acquitted her, they should have offered her protection for going back, because they know what happened. They know what happened to people.
So you're thinking contemporary. They're not going to do that.
They're not going to do that. Yeah,
I
know.
Now, even then, you may not get protection. So
Yeah.
back then, you would definitely not get protection.
That's for sure.
The fact that she went back and wanted to stay there is amazing. I know she had her own farm. That's probably the only.
She
reason
probably didn't
went
have
back.
anywhere else to go.
That's
really.
what I'm thinking
Yeah.
too. I would have sold my farm and just moved.
Well, remember, they mentioned that she was poor and she was making a very scant living off that farm. So she probably didn't even have enough to do that.
But if you sold your farm, you would have some money, and you could probably just move somewhere else and get a smaller place.
Well,
But maybe
who knows? Who knows what the situation was?
Maybe she wasn't in control of her own life at that point to do that. I mean, she was 46 when she got married, and
49.
this stuff went on.
Yeah.
No, she was 46. He was
46.
Yeah,
I thought she was 49.
He
okay.
was
53.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You got to think she's probably creeping into her 50s now, so she doesn't have a lot of energy to run around and sell my property and move. And
Too bad she didn't have any
place.
relatives offering to take her in.
Yeah, but if you came from England with your husband, there is nobody.
There's nobody.
No sisters or brothers, no uncles and aunts.
I feel sorry for her. I really do.
Can you imagine stringing a woman up like that just because of rumors and gossip?
Those jackasses.
And then leaving her for dead and covering her in the
those
snow.
assholes.
You could say that because no one cares.
Those assholes.
There you go. Yeah, it's and I would say if I was Mary Webster, if that didn't make me want to be a witch, nothing would.
and the interesting part about that is that there actually, I believe there actually was a lot of witchcraft back then, real witchcraft. But the real witches, I think most of them remained hidden, and it was only the ones who were not real witches, but they were different. They were outcasts,
Well, what's a witch really? To the common God-fearing person, what is a witch?
Okay, well back then.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, well back then, what was considered a witch, or what was actually what a lot of American families traditionally inherited from what was witchcraft was mainly herb women who were able to
live off the land,
and they also and they came up with spells, traditions, talismans, remedies. They were good with being midwives and that was traditional.
Native American shamans. It's kind of the same thing.
It's kind of the same thing.
They learned to to be the medicine man for the community, to help when they need help.
And the witch was considered, and was actually, and it was in Europe too, and it actually was in America, was considered the herb woman who was in touch with nature, and actually a lot of them knew how to work with the forces of it. I mean, they knew medicine, but they knew how to work with it. But they were your ordinary neighbor that went to church. A lot of them went to church, and a lot of them just blended in with the community and didn't talk about it. Of course, they didn't talk about it. So a lot of the real ones actually managed to remain hidden, and that's why you see people today in some of those states and towns and saying, my relative from such and such year was an herb woman, and we inherited this and that from her, because they managed to survive and remain just in the family.
So that's what's interesting, is if you have an older woman who's good with herbs, remedies, and cures for her family,
right?
She gets accused of witchcraft. She's already taught all these remedies and how to make these to her family members.
Yeah.
As years go on, do they suddenly think we have to stop making these? People will think we're a witch too.
Maybe. I think it's a little bit of both.
A little paranoia, a little bit of a fear based on the crowd mentality.
I think it's probably a little bit of both. Some of them probably were able to keep the tradition alive without being caught, and it just stayed quiet all these years. And some of them were probably a little afraid and didn't continue it.
Well, and if someone was accused of a witch, I'm sure they'd tease the rest of the family, like, "Oh, your mother, your grandmother was a witch. Ooh, she's from that family that has a witch. They're in league with the devil."
I've actually heard cases of that happening too. Yeah, I've heard about that.
Again, it's ignorance. Ignorance still breeds.
It sure does.
It's alive and living.
It's alive and living today. Yeah, we don't hear about it as much, but when we do, everybody's astonished that it still happens, but it does.
It does.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, I hope that this...
That's a little different than most witchcraft cases, I think.
It's a little bit different than most witchcraft cases, and actually, if there's anybody who knows something about Half-Hang Mary that we haven't covered, or if you actually are related to her, or you know something from the community that we don't know, I'd like to hear more, because I don't think the whole story's been covered, really.
Well, I'm sure it hasn't. Being that old, it's hard to find facts, I'm sure, at this point.
Yeah.
Because you would have to have it in records, but...
Right.
Again, you never know. There might be something else out there by someone else that might know something.
I'd like to hear more. And I'm glad we were able to talk about this woman and bring her memory back. She deserves it.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, folks. There's another episode of Ecto Portal, and until next week, we're gonna say goodbye.
Bye.
Bye. Royalty-free, copyright-free music by Kevin MacLeod and Ross Bugden.